The sky above was burning in shades of gold and crimson as the war reached the desert plains. Human soldiers were spread thin, holding their line against the armored alien troops who moved with precision and deadly grace. Amid the chaos, Captain Daniel Rourke pushed forward, determined to reach the forward position before it was too late. His eyes scanned the battlefield for wounded, his boots crunching on the scorched ground. He had been told this mission was only about securing a ridge, but deep inside, he knew something else was waiting here. Blaster fire cut through the air, and explosions shook the sand under his feet. The sound of metallic boots approached from the side, and Daniel spun to see a squad of alien warriors emerging from the smoke. Their golden armor reflected the sunlight, making them look like living statues. But among them, someone stood out. A woman, taller than most of her kind, her silver-white hair flowing in the wind. She wasn't holding a weapon, she was clutching, her head stumbling forward as if the noise and heat were overwhelming her. Without thinking, Daniel moved toward her, weaving between craters and fallen soldiers. He could see her eyes now, bright and strange, like liquid silver. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but only a broken gasp came out. He noticed a dark burn across her armor, near her ribs. It was a clean shot from a human rifle, and the metal around it glowed faintly from the heat. She looked like she could collapse any second. Daniel reached her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. She flinched at his touch, but her eyes met his. There was no hate there, only pain. For a moment, the battle noise faded around them. Daniel's voice was calm, almost soft. "You're brave and beautiful," he said. Her silver eyes widened, and for the first time she let herself breathe. A single tear rolled down her cheek, catching the sunlight like crystal. She whispered back, her voice shaking. "Thank you, human." The words were quiet but strong enough to cut through the roar of war. The moment didn't last. A warning shout from behind made Daniel turn, spotting enemy soldiers rushing toward them. He grabbed her arm, pulling her into cover behind a broken transport vehicle. The smell of burnt metal filled the air. The alien woman winced as she moved, clutching her side. Daniel knew she needed medical help fast, but he also knew that carrying her back through open ground would make them both easy targets. He peeked over the wreckage, counting at least 8. Hostiles closing in. She tried to push him away, her pride refusing to let a human shield her. But when her legs gave out, Daniel caught her before she hit the ground. "You're not dying here," he said. Her gaze softened for a heartbeat before she turned her head, hiding her expression. He could feel her trembling through the armor. She wasn't just wounded, she was scared. Not of dying, but of what her own people might do if they found her with him. That thought made him grip his rifle tighter. The enemy drew nearer, their golden armor clanking in rhythm. Daniel pressed his back to the wreckage, his mind racing. If he stayed here, they'd be surrounded. If he moved, they'd be exposed. He glanced at the woman again. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes half closed. But then she looked at him, and he saw something else. Trust. It was faint, almost hidden, but it was there. He had no idea why she trusted him, but it was enough to make him choose the riskier path. With one arm holding her close and the other gripping his rifle, Daniel broke cover, sprinting toward a ridge that could hide them from view. Blaster bolts hissed past his head, kicking up sand at his feet. He didn't stop. Every step felt heavier, but he kept moving until they slid down behind the ridge, shielded from sight. The woman leaned against him, her hand resting lightly on his chest. She spoke again, so quietly he almost didn't hear her. "I owe you my life, human." And for the first time since the war began, Daniel felt something more powerful than fear. Daniel's heart pounded as he scanned the horizon from their position behind the ridge. The alien woman sat beside him, her breathing still uneven but stronger than before. He noticed the way her fingers tightened on the edge of her armor, as if bracing herself for another wave of pain. He wanted to ask her name, but the sound of distant footsteps made him keep his voice low. They were not alone out here. The ridge gave them cover from direct sight, but it would not protect them if the enemy decided to search the area. Daniel adjusted his rifle, his eyes sweeping across the desert for movement. The woman's gaze followed, his every move, as though studying how he worked. He wondered if she was trained as a soldier or something else entirely. The armor she wore was unlike the standard battle gear of the alien warriors he had seen before. It was more ornate, almost ceremonial. She shifted slightly, wincing when the burn on her side pulled against her ribs. Daniel noticed a faint shimmer along the wound, as if the armor itself was slowly sealing it. He reached toward her, but paused, unsure if she would allow him to help. She surprised him by leaning closer, letting him check the damage. Up close, her eyes seemed even stranger, reflecting the sunlight in a way that made them look alive. She didn't flinch when his fingers brushed the dented metal. "You risked yourself for me," she said quietly, her voice still carrying that unique echo of her people. Daniel shook his head. Didn't think about it. Just did what needed to be done. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but it faded quickly. She glanced away, her expression shadowed by something heavier than fear. Daniel sensed it wasn't, just the battle that troubled her. There was something about her presence here that she hadn't revealed yet. The sound of a distant engine drew Daniel's attention. He rose slightly, spotting a patrol skimmer cutting across the desert in their direction. They had minutes, maybe less, before it reached their position. He glanced down at her. "We need to move." She nodded but struggled when she tried to stand. Without a word, Daniel slipped his arm under hers, supporting her weight. Her armor was warm against his side, and he could feel the faint tremor in her muscles. They moved along the ridge, keeping low as the skimmer's hum grew louder. Sand shifted under their boots, and Daniel's focus narrowed to finding a place. They could disappear. The alien woman whispered something in her language, and moments later, a section of the ridge shimmered before them. It wasn't rock. It was some kind of cloaking barrier. She pressed her hand to a glowing emblem hidden in the stone, and an opening appeared just wide enough for them to slip inside. Inside, the air was cooler and dimly lit by soft golden light. The chamber smelled faintly of metal and herbs, and Daniel realized this was no natural cave. It was a hidden outpost. She leaned against the wall, catching her breath while Daniel scanned the interior for threats. There were no signs of recent activity. She finally looked at him again. "This place is safe? For now?" He studied her face, wondering why she would reveal such a hiding place to a human. Her voice softened when she spoke again. "My name is Arya." Daniel nodded, repeating it quietly. Arya. The way she looked at him when he said her name made the air between them feel different, heavier. She hesitated before continuing. "I am not just a soldier. I was part of the Royal Guard." Daniel understood immediately. The ornate armor, the way the others had protected her in battle, it all made sense. But if she was Royal Guard, her being here in enemy territory meant something far more dangerous. Daniel stepped closer, his voice firm but calm. "Then we need to get you out of here before they realize you're missing." She looked away for a moment, then back at him with a mix of defiance and gratitude. "You already saved me once, human. But leaving this place, it won't be so simple." Her words carried weight, as if every step they took from here would draw the attention of more than just soldiers. Daniel understood that their survival now depended on trust, and they had only just begun to build it. Daniel stayed near the entrance of the hidden outpost, his rifle resting in his hands. Outside, the sound of the patrol skimmer faded into the distance, but he knew it would return. Arya sat on a low bench carved from the stone, her fingers tracing the pattern on her armor. She looked lost in thought. but her eyes kept drifting toward him. There was a quiet understanding between them now, though neither spoke it aloud. The dim golden light made the chamber feel warmer than the desert outside. Daniel crouched near a supply crate, checking its contents. Inside, he found sealed water packs and some unfamiliar ration bars. He handed one to Arya, who accepted it without hesitation. She bit into it carefully, as if it was not her first time eating human-made food. "Better than I expected," she said, her voice low but steady. Daniel gave a short smile before taking a sip from his own water pack. "You said you were part of the Royal Guard," Daniel began, leaning against the wall. "Why were you out here so far from your stronghold?" Arya's gaze dropped, her silver eyes shadowed. "I was sent on a mission, one I did not agree with. When I refused to carry it out, I became a liability." She glanced toward the entrance, as though remembering the soldiers chasing her earlier. "The ones you saw in the battle, they were not here to win a fight. They were here to bring me back." Daniel felt the weight in her words. She was not just running from an enemy army, she was fleeing her own people. That explained her hesitation. To be seen with him, and why she had risked showing him the hidden outpost. "If they want you alive, they'll keep searching," he said. "If they want you dead." He left the rest unsaid, but Arya's tightened jaw showed she understood. She set down the ration bar and straightened her back, her posture shifting into something sharper. "I will not be taken," she said firmly. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded others before. Daniel studied her for a moment. Even injured, she had the presence of a leader. But strength alone would not keep her safe out here. "Then we need a plan," he replied. "We can't stay in one place too long. If they scan the area with drones, this place will light up." Arya gave a short nod, though he could see the strain in her movements. They gathered what supplies they could carry. Daniel slung his pack over his shoulder, checking the ammo in, his rifle. Arya retrieved a curved blade from the wall, its edge gleaming faintly in the golden light. She handled it with familiarity, spinning it once before sliding it into a sheath on her hip. "My people may have turned against me," she said quietly, "but I still carry their weapons." Daniel noticed the way her hand lingered on the hilt, as if drawing strength from it. Before leaving, Arya approached the wall panel she had used earlier. With a press of her palm, the opening shimmered into existence again. Sunlight spilled into the chamber, carrying with it the dry heat of the desert. Daniel stepped out first, scanning the horizon. The sky was clear for now, but the wind carried the faint scent of smoke from the earlier battle. Arya followed, her golden armor bright against the sand, yet somehow she moved like a shadow, her steps silent. They traveled along the base of the ridge, using the natural rock formations for cover. Daniel kept his senses sharp, ears tuned to any sound that did not belong to the desert. Arya stayed close, matching his pace. For someone who had been wounded not long ago, she moved with surprising control. Still, he noticed the moments when her breath caught and her steps slowed. Without saying a word, he adjusted their route to pass through more shaded areas, giving her brief moments to recover. By the time the sun dipped lower, they had reached a shallow ravine. It offered a narrow path forward, shielded on both sides by jagged rock. Here, Daniel finally allowed them to stop. Arya sank onto a flat stone, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "You move like a soldier," she remarked, watching him set his rifle within easy reach. "Old habits," he replied. Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer before she looked away, her expression unreadable. In that quiet pause, Daniel realized something had changed between them. The light in the ravine dimmed as the sun sank further, casting long shadows across the jagged rocks. Daniel kept watch at the narrow opening, his rifle steady. Arya remained, seated on the stone, conserving her strength. She closed her eyes briefly, but Daniel noticed her breathing had steadied. The earlier pain in her movements was fading, though the wound beneath her armor still needed proper treatment. From somewhere beyond the ravine, a faint mechanical hum reached Daniel's ears. He raised his hand, signaling Arya to stay silent. Slowly, he moved to the edge and peered out. A small aerial drone was gliding across the desert, scanning the surface with a pale beam of light. Its movement was slow, deliberate, and far too close to their position. Daniel stepped back, his jaw tightening. "They're sweeping the area," he murmured. Arya's eyes opened, her silver gaze sharp. "If they find us, more will follow." She rose from her seat, testing her balance. Daniel could see the weight of her armor pulling on her shoulders, but she stood firm. "We move now," he said, already securing his pack. She retrieved her blade without hesitation. Together they began making their way deeper into the ravine. Each step calculated to avoid loose stones that could give away their position. The drone's hum grew fainter as they descended further into the winding path. The walls of the ravine narrowed, forcing them to walk in single file. Daniel kept his eyes forward while listening for any change in the sound above. The desert wind whistled through cracks in the stone, masking their footsteps. Still, his grip on the rifle never relaxed. Arya moved behind him, her steps light despite the weight of her armor. After several minutes, they reached a wider section of the ravine where the air felt cooler. Here, the ground was scattered with fragments of metal half buried in the sand. Daniel crouched to examine one, brushing away the dust. It was part of an old weapon, corroded but still recognizable. Arya glanced at the debris and frowned. "This was a battlefield once," she said quietly. Her voice carried an edge, as if she knew the history of this place. Daniel straightened, scanning the rock walls. If there was a fight here, there might be something useful left behind. They searched the area, finding a few broken power cells, damaged armor plates, and a rusted canteen. Nothing seemed immediately valuable until Arya uncovered a small metal case hidden beneath a slab of stone. She knelt, brushing the sand away before opening it. Inside were several vials of a glowing amber liquid. "Medical serum," she explained. "Rare but effective." Daniel helped her apply the serum to the burn on her side. The liquid seeped into the damaged armor and skin, emitting a faint warmth. Arya inhaled sharply as the pain dulled almost instantly. "Better?" he asked. She nodded once, her posture already straighter. "Much." For the first time since they had met, her expression softened into something almost peaceful. Daniel caught himself staring for a moment before looking away, focusing on repacking the supplies. Their brief pause ended when a sharp crack echoed through the ravine. Daniel froze, recognizing the sound of a rifle discharge. A second later, a burst of sand erupted near their feet. "Sniper!" he hissed. They dove for cover behind a boulder, the sharp scent of scorched earth filling the air. Arya drew her blade, scanning the ridge above for movement. Daniel spotted a flash of metal and returned fire, forcing the shooter to retreat. The silence that followed was tense and heavy. Daniel remained in position, watching the ridge in case the sniper returned. Arya crouched beside him, her breathing calm despite the close call. "They know we're here now," she said, "and they won't stop until they have me." Daniel met her gaze, seeing no fear in her eyes, only resolve. He knew they had little time before reinforcements arrived. This battle was no longer about survival alone. It was about protecting her at any cost. The air in the ravine felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves were closing in on them. Daniel kept his rifle raised, scanning every ledge above. Arya stayed close, her blade ready in her hand. The sun had dropped lower, casting long shadows that twisted across the rock. They both knew the sniper's shot had given away their position. It was only a matter of time before more enemies arrived, Daniel pointed toward the far end of the ravine, where the stone walls opened into a narrow pass. We head that way. Once we're through, they can't trap us as easily. Arya gave a short nod, though her eyes kept darting back to the ridges above. They moved quickly, keeping to the deepest shadows. Every few steps, Daniel stopped to listen, trying to separate the sound of wind from the faint scrape of boots on stone. Halfway to the pass, the sound of engines rumbled in the distance. Daniel's stomach tightened. That was not a patrol skimmer. It was heavier, slower, and more dangerous. Armored transport, he muttered. Arya's expression darkened. If they deploy troops here, we'll be surrounded. Daniel scanned the rock formations around them and spotted a narrow slope leading upward. It was steep and treacherous, but it offered a way out of the ravine. This way, he said, starting toward it. Arya followed, her movements precise despite the uneven terrain. The slope was littered with loose stones that shifted under their boots, threatening to send them sliding back down. Daniel moved first, using his rifle strap for balance, then reached back to steady her. She didn't resist the help. At the top, the view opened into a wide plateau dotted with boulders and patches of dry grass. The armored transport was visible, in the distance, crawling across the desert like a predator on the hunt. Daniel crouched behind a boulder, watching the transport's path. It was moving in a sweeping arc, cutting off potential escape routes. Arya knelt beside him, her silver eyes fixed on the machine. "They're hurting us," she said. Daniel nodded grimly. "Then we have to be unpredictable." He scanned the plateau and spotted a narrow fissure between two cliffs. It was risky, but if they reached it, they could vanish from sight. He gestured toward it, and Arya immediately understood. They sprinted across the plateau, weaving between rocks for cover. The sound of the transport's engines grew louder, accompanied by the metallic clank of its weapons adjusting. A burst of plasma fire streaked across the sand, exploding in a flash of heat behind them. Daniel pushed forward, refusing to look back. Arya moved with him, her blade drawn in case they were forced into close combat. Dust rose around them, stinging their eyes, but they didn't slow. The fissure loomed ahead, narrow and jagged, just wide enough for them to slip through. Daniel reached it first, ducking inside and pulling Arya in after him. The moment they were hidden, the sound of plasma fire echoed against the cliff walls. The enemy knew they had gone in, but the tight space would make it difficult for large forces to follow. Arya pressed her back to the stone, catching her breath. "We can't stay here long," she said. Daniel agreed. They moved deeper into the fissure, the air cooler and damp with trapped moisture. The path twisted and narrowed, forcing them to walk single file. Faint light filtered in from cracks above, revealing marks on the stone. Arya ran, her fingers along them, her expression changing. "These are old symbols from my people," she said. "This place was once used for secret gatherings." Daniel glanced at the markings, wondering how much history was hidden in the desert beneath their feet. The fissure eventually opened into a hidden hollow surrounded by high cliffs. In the center stood a stone pillar carved with the same symbols. At its base, there were signs of recent activity, small footprints, scattered fabric, and the remains of a campfire. Daniel crouched to inspect them. "Someone's been here, and not long ago." Arya stepped closer, her tone cautious. "If they were my people, they may still be near." The thought brought a new edge to the tension between them. Daniel rose from where he had been kneeling by the old campfire. The ashes were still warm, which meant whoever had been here could not be far. Arya moved to the edge of the hollow, her eyes scanning the cliffs above. The faint sound of shifting rock echoed through the space, carried on the wind. Daniel adjusted his grip on his rifle and nodded toward the noise. They were not alone. A shadow flickered across the stone as figures emerged from a narrow passage on the far side. 3 alien warriors stepped into the hollow, their armor less ornate than Arya's but still unmistakable. Their weapons were drawn, and their eyes locked instantly on her. One of them spoke in her language, his voice sharp and commanding. Arya's jaw tightened as she replied in short, clipped words. Daniel could not understand the exchange, but the tension in the air told him enough. The lead warrior took a step forward, his gaze flicking briefly to Daniel before returning to Arya. She did not move. Her hand rested lightly on the hilt of her blade, but she did not draw it. Daniel shifted his weight, ready to act if things turned violent. The second warrior moved to flank them, his weapon raised. That was when Daniel spoke. "If you're here to take her, you'll have to get through me." His voice carried clearly across the hollow. The warrior hesitated, clearly not expecting a human to intervene so boldly. Arya glanced at Daniel, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. She spoke again to the lead warrior, her tone sharper. "Now!" The alien's expression darkened, and he signaled for his men to lower their weapons slightly. Daniel kept his rifle steady, unwilling to relax. Whatever Arya had said seemed to hold weight, but the danger had not passed. Slowly, the lead warrior removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face and deep-set eyes. He spoke again, this time in heavily accented human language. "She must return. She is bound to our command." Daniel shook his head. "She's not going anywhere against her will." The man's eyes narrowed, but he did not answer right. Away. Instead, he turned his attention back to Arya, as if trying to read her decision directly from her expression. Arya stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and the warriors. "I will not return," she said in a voice that carried through the hollow. The defiance in her tone was like steel. The warriors exchanged glances, their uncertainty clear. The lead warrior's grip tightened on his weapon before he slowly lowered it. "Then you are no longer one of us," he said. The words were heavy, final, and without ceremony he turned to leave, motioning for the others to follow. Daniel watched them disappear into the narrow passage they had come from. The tension slowly drained from his body, but his mind stayed alert. Arya remained still for a moment longer, her gaze fixed on the empty space where they had stood. "That was my final severance," she said quietly. "I can never return to my people now." Daniel stepped closer. "Then we'll make sure you have somewhere else to go." Her eyes softened just slightly at the words. They rested for only a short while before continuing their journey. Leaving the hollow meant stepping back into the open desert, where the wind carried grit into their faces and the heat radiated from the sand. Daniel set a steady pace, keeping an eye on the horizon. Arya walked beside him, silent but watchful. The absence of her former comrades did not mean they were safe. If anything, it meant their enemies might act with fewer restraints. As night began to fall, they found shelter in the ruins of an old stone structure half buried in the sand. Inside, the air was cooler, and faint starlight streamed through cracks in the walls. Daniel secured the entrance with loose stones, while Arya sat against one of the walls, removing a section of her armor to check her wound. The serum from earlier had done its work well. She moved more easily now, her strength clearly returning. Daniel sat across from her, resting his rifle across his knees. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence between them comfortable. Finally, Arya spoke. "When you called me brave and beautiful, it was the first time I felt seen for who I am, not for my title or my armor." Daniel's mouth curved into a small smile. "Then, I'll keep seeing you that way." The flicker of warmth in her silver eyes told him she believed him. The ruins creaked as the wind moved through broken arches. Daniel woke before dawn and checked the entrance stones. The sky outside was dark blue with a thin line of silver near the horizon. Arya sat cross-legged with her blade across her knees. Her eyes were open and calm, but Daniel knew she had not slept much. They shared water in silence and listened to the desert breathe. Daniel studied the tracks near the doorway and saw faint boot prints leading away. They were not from him or Arya. The prints were careful and spaced wide, the pattern of a scout. Arya joined him and traced a curve in the dust with one finger. She nodded once and pointed east. "They know we are near," Arya said in a steady voice. Daniel checked his rifle and tightened his strap. He looked at her wound and saw only a thin mark now. The serum had done more than close flesh. It had given her strength faster than he expected. She rose without help and moved like a trained shadow. They left the ruins and crossed the sand while dawn brushed gold over the land. The day would bring heat and bright light that revealed every mistake. Daniel kept them low along a line of half-buried pillars. Arya walked with him and watched the sky for drones. When the first beam swept the sand, they were already under stone. Beyond the pillars stood an old relay tower made of dark metal. Its top was bent and scarred from past strikes. Arya stopped and placed her palm on a panel near the base. The metal warmed under her touch, and a soft tone answered from within. She looked at Daniel and spoke with care. "This tower can send a code to stop the hunt." Daniel scanned the open ground around the tower and saw signs of patrols. Tracks crossed and recrossed like a net. "Will your code work if your rank is gone?" he asked. Arya held his gaze and nodded. "Royal Guard. Codes bind to oaths, not positions," she said. "I broke with my leaders, but I kept my oath to protect life." They climbed through a narrow hatch and entered a shaft that smelled like old rain and metal dust. The interior lights were dead, so they moved by the glow of Arya's wrist charm. The steps were uneven and slick, and Daniel felt the tower tremble in the wind. From above came a faint tapping sound like careful fingers on glass. Arya said it was the tower waking. At the control deck, cracked screens lined a half-circle console. Arya placed both hands on a plate and spoke in her language. The air hummed and a thin band of light rose between her palms. Symbols turned and clicked into place like stars forming a path. Daniel watched her face as she worked. She looked fierce and gentle at the same time. A sharp tone split the quiet and a warning flashed in harsh red across the panel. Arya read it fast and her jaw set hard. "They locked the channel," she said. "To send the code, I must use the high key. It is tied to my life signs. If I fail the check, the tower will broadcast our location to every unit." Daniel stepped beside her and rested a steady hand on the console. "Then you will not fail," he said. Arya met his eyes and breathed in slowly. She closed her hands around the band of light and let it flow into the plate. Her voice grew deeper as she spoke the oath. The tower shuddered once, and the screens turned from red to white. Outside, engines roared across the desert, and dust rose like a curtain. The armored transport had found the ruins and now turned toward the relay. Daniel saw it through a slit in the wall and weighed their chances. "We have minutes," he said. Arya focused on a final seal and pressed her wrist to the metal. A thin needle slid out and tasted her blood. The deck lights flared, and the tower's spine sent a pulse into the sky. The sound was soft, but Daniel felt it in his bones. Arya swayed and caught herself on the console. She looked pale for a moment and then stood straight. The screen showed a symbol shaped like a shield with open hands. The code had gone out and could not be recalled. Another alarm rose from the base of the tower as the transport reached the pillars. Soldiers spread in a line and aimed at the hatch. Daniel moved to the stairs and set his rifle. "We hold them. Here," he said. Arya joined him with her blade and a short spear she found in a rack. She stood at his shoulder without doubt or fear. The first soldier climbed into the shaft, and Daniel fired a clean shot. The second rushed fast, and Arya struck the spear through the gap in his armor. More came with shields and heavy boots that shook the steps. The tower groaned as if it felt the struggle inside. Sand hissed through the slit and turned the air into grit. Over the noise, a new sound rolled like thunder across iron. Arya turned her head and listened with a strange stillness. Her eyes widened and then softened. "The code reached command," she said. "Look to the west." Daniel risked a glance and saw a dark shape move low against the sky. It was not alien and it was not a skimmer. It was a human dropship with escort fighters in a tight wing. The soldiers below hesitated as the dropship roared closer. Dust blew in a hard wave and sent them stumbling. Daniel pressed forward and drove them down the steps. Arya followed with fierce grace, her blade catching and turning the last strike. The transport outside tried to pivot for a shot and then pulled back as the fighters dropped into attack lines. Daniel looked at Arya and saw the light of the screens paint silver on her face. She looked back at him and gave a small, real smile. "You said you would see me for who I am," she said. "Now let me stand with you for who you are." The tower rang with the sound of engines and the promise of rescue drawing near. The dropship descended fast, its thrusters cutting through the desert air with a roar. Daniel kept firing short bursts to keep the alien soldiers pinned in the stairwell. Arya moved like a force of nature beside him, her blade flashing in tight arcs. The enemy tried to push forward again, but the shadow of the human craft passing overhead broke their focus. Through the narrow slit in the wall, Daniel saw the escort fighters unleash bright streams of fire at the armored transport below. The machine shuddered, its plating breaking apart under the assault. Arya stepped closer to the window, her silver eyes following the battle outside. "They will not hold position long," she said. Daniel understood. The dropship was here to extract them, but they had to reach it before the enemy regrouped. The first wave of alien troops in the tower's shaft fell back under the combined strikes from rifle fire and Arya's spear. Daniel used the brief pause to check the magazine on his weapon. Arya leaned against the wall for a heartbeat, catching her breath, then straightened again. She was not going to stop until they were clear. "We move now," Daniel said firmly. They descended the inner steps quickly, the sound of boots and armor echoing off the metal walls. At the base, the hatch was already buckling under enemy pressure from outside. Daniel dropped low and kicked it outward with force, knocking one soldier back. Arya stepped through first, her blade cutting the air in swift, controlled movements. Daniel followed, laying down covering fire. The heat outside hit them immediately, along with the roar of the dropship's engines as it hovered just above the ground. A human pilot in the open bay waved them forward. Arya moved toward it without hesitation, but two alien soldiers broke from cover and rushed to intercept. Daniel dropped the first with a clean shot. Arya met the second head-on, her blade striking true before he could raise his weapon. They reached the dropship's ramp and climbed aboard as the pilot shouted into his comms. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fuel and metal. Daniel dropped into a seat, his rifle across his lap, while Arya stood near the open hatch. She kept her eyes on the battlefield until the ship began to rise. The sight of the burning transport below drew a slow breath from her chest. As they cleared the plateau, the escort fighters fell into position around them. Daniel glanced at Arya, who still had not moved from her place by the hatch. "You could have left me," she said suddenly. Daniel shook his head without hesitation. "I never leave someone behind," he replied. She turned toward him then, her silver eyes catching the light from the cabin in a way that made them almost glow. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "We're clear of enemy range. Destination is Command Base Gamma." Daniel leaned, back in his seat, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. Arya walked over and sat across from him, her blade resting beside her. "Your people will question why you brought me," she said quietly. "Some may see me as a danger." Daniel's answer was steady. "They'll see you as someone I trust." For the first time since they had met, Arya's expression softened fully. There was no guard in her gaze, no barrier of rank or duty. "Then I will earn that trust every day," she said. Daniel gave A small nod, and they both let the quiet settle between them for a while. Outside, the desert stretched away into fading light, the long shadows of the cliffs falling behind them. When the dropship finally touched down at the human base, a team of soldiers waited. Their weapons lowered slightly when they saw Daniel step off first. Arya followed, her armor marked by the day's fight, but her stance unshaken. The air smelled of fuel and hot stone. Somewhere in the distance, engines rumbled, but there was only the low hum of the base coming to life around them. Daniel walked beside Arya as they crossed the landing pad. "What will you do now?" he asked. She looked ahead, the wind catching strands of her silver hair. "I will stand with those who see me. Not the title I once carried," she said. "If you will have me, I will stand with you." Daniel stopped, meeting her eyes with a steady look. "You're brave and beautiful," he said again, his voice carrying the same quiet strength as the first time. Arya's eyes brightened, and for a moment the harsh world around them seemed softer. She gave a single nod, and a small, real smile touched her lips. "Thank you, human," she replied. This time the words carried no uncertainty, only truth.